the Electoral College does force political parties to pay attention to more parts of the country, right? You have to be popular in a lot of states just to be credible. And then you work to build from the states where you're already popular into the states that are more politically balanced. That is not a bad thing. That's a good thing for coalition building in our country.
One of the most interesting things on our ballot is the national popular vote. Does Colorado want to join this interstate compact, which gives away our 9, soon to be 10 electoral votes to the winner of the so-called national popular vote when it comes to electing a president? This is a tricky one. Trent England is with Save Our States. He joins us from Oklahoma right now. This is something that you've been working on for a long time. First of all, give us the really quick lesson on the Electoral College. Why is the Electoral College so important and different in America?
Yeah, so the Electoral College came, it's part of the original Constitution, and it came out of a debate there about whether to have a parliamentary system, whether to have a popular vote, or whether to do something else. And the Electoral College is kind of a compromise between those two things, where the founders said they didn't want a parliamentary system. That's how most of the big democracies around the world have they're parliamentary. Nobody votes for prime minister ever, right? They just vote for members of parliament. They didn't want congressional politics to control the White House, the executive branch. But when they talked about having a direct election, having a national popular vote, they realized that meant that a few big regions of the country could control everybody else. And so they came up with what at the time was a brand new system. Nobody had ever done this before. We came to call it the Electoral College, where we have a 2-step election process. We vote in our states and choose the president that way, in this indirect way. It prevents regional politics. It keeps states in control of elections. It prevents fraud in one state from stealing the whole thing, because you can only steal one state if you're committing fraud there. And that's the system that we have today. It's a system that's so good that Germany and India basically sort of copied it in the 20th century, and they use a kind of electoral college today. So
let's jump to this.
It was created, but not so much now.
Let's jump to the proposal, which is on our ballot. If this passes, we join a interstate compact. And when there's enough electoral votes from all the states that are in the compact, over 270 of electoral votes, then all those states will agree to have their electors vote for whomever wins the national popular vote. Of course, there is no national popular vote. We do that kind of as an oddity, as a scorekeeping bit of trivia. We have 50 separate elections to elect these electors who then vote for president. I find it interesting that in those countries where they don't have the Electoral College, a person can become president with a plurality. That is, they don't have to win over half the electoral vote. They can win something else. Germany did that, which is where Hitler came from. Venezuela did that. There's a real danger when you open this up to a popular vote where anybody could win without getting majority. That happens. What is your big fear about a national popular vote? Because I think on an instinctive level, people really like that idea. Sounds like democracy.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you make a really good point about Germany, right? Germany had a more direct system before, and it led to all this splintering, and eventually Hitler comes to power. And after World War II, what do? They created an electoral college type system to try to make sure that never happens again, right? It is checks and balances. My big fears are two things. One is this idea that you're mentioning, right? That our politics just fractures, that you wind up with splinter parties and spoiler candidates and people winning, not with 53%, or even 48%, you wind up with people winning with 22%, right? That's completely made possible by the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And you look at countries that do that, places like Mexico, they are not models of political stability, right? My other fear is that it would destroy people's faith in the system, because right now today, if people think that there is some kind of chicanery going on in Chicago, right? There's stuff in the ballot box up there in some particular presidential election, all they can steal is Illinois. If Colorado becomes part of national popular vote and this compact takes effect, when they stuff the ballot box in Chicago, they can steal Colorado's electoral votes, right? That is a recipe for people having less faith in the system and basically forcing us to federalize control of elections, which means presidential, the White House basically winds up in charge of presidential elections, right? That also is not a recipe for stability or faith in the system.
I don't know if people follow that as much, but when we see hanging chads in Florida, well, Florida is up for grabs, and we focus on that. But if you have 50 different states, if one state had a bad Secretary of State and decided to push bad results, push things into the ballot box, go crazy, if Chicago wanted to say, hey, we want to win this nationwide, if you wanted to have a recount of the national popular vote, I don't know if it's possible to get that recount done in time for the president to be sworn in, because you'd have to do 50 different audits of every state and then hand count each and all those ballots. Imagine what happened in Gore versus Bush back in 2000 when they're looking at hanging chads. Imagine doing hanging chads for 300 million people around the country. It opens up the possibility that one rogue state can infect the entire nation.
That's right. And, why did the Supreme Court ultimately step in 7-2 and stop what was going on in Florida? It's because they were recounting ballots by different standards in different parts of the state, right? If we try to have a national election, it's just fundamentally unfair to have these states with all these different rules, but nobody has come up with a way to deal with that. And ultimately, I think you would have to hand over all the control to Washington, D.C., which I think would be a disaster. But in the meantime, this national popular vote compact would create a situation where it's just fundamentally unfair, right? How do you have a national recount or even just a national election where you're supposedly combining all these votes, but people are voting under totally different rules? Some states allow, incarcerated felons to vote by mail from their prisons. And other states, obviously, most states don't do that, right? Some states give driver's licenses to anybody who shows up, and it's very easy then to wind up registered to vote. Other states have real security processes in their elections, right? I mean, you're exactly right, John. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact leaves all these questions unanswered, which means less faith in the system, more power for federal judges to decide elections, and ultimately a lot more power for Washington, D.C. to control elections in our states.
I think people don't quite get that our founders created a system that was the United States, and the states created the federal government. And at the founding, states were more important. Now the federal government, which the states created, really dictates a lot to the states. It's reversed. And we still want states to be represented. They have parity. That is, they are also sovereign states on an equal level with the federal government. That was the idea of this. And so a state has that authority. I really worry about what this means for populous areas. So if LA County and New York City have such incredible population densities, maybe throw in Chicago, those three cities are where the action is to elect a president. And if you win those counties, if you win those cities, you win the nation. I keep hearing people say, Colorado should be important to candidates, and if it's not important, they don't fly in, they don't come and talk, and your vote is wasted. Well, my vote is wasted if California and New York State vote for me.
No, that's exactly right. LA County, one county in California, has 10 million residents, right? I mean, that's much bigger than Colorado, right?
That's almost twice the size of Colorado. One county in Colorado, or one county in California, is almost twice the size population-wise of our whole state.
Yeah, and that's that's what James Madison said. He stands up in the Constitutional Convention. He says, "Look, I like the idea of a popular vote, right? It's simple, it's easy, right? It has undeniable appeal." But Madison says you can't create a system that gives so much power to the big population centers that everybody else knows that they're frozen out. Not just that they're going to get less attention in one election or a couple elections, but they're frozen out forever, because one of the states that Madison was worried about was New York. I mean, these things do not change all that much over time, right? New York's still one of the biggest states in our country, and the other state at the time was Virginia. Now Virginia is more of a middle-sized state, but Madison was a Virginian, and he didn't want a system that gave his own state too much power in the system, because it's just not a good way to do politics, right? The Electoral College does force political parties to pay attention to more parts of the country, right? You have to be popular in a lot of states just to be credible. And then you work to build from the states where you're already popular into the states that are more politically balanced. That is not a bad thing. That's a good thing for coalition building in our country.
Let me just throw this one at you. This is what people will say, that there have been a handful of elections, including our last election, where the majority of Americans didn't want this guy elected. A minority of Americans elected Donald Trump. That's wrong. And therefore, what we need to do is have a national popular vote. Then we wouldn't have had Trump, we wouldn't have had Bush, we wouldn't have had a few other presidents. And no one seems to mind when the popular vote and the electoral vote are the same. Then everything seems like it works. But in those cases, it doesn't. The Electoral College does not represent a majority of Americans. How do you deny that?
Yeah, no, that's true. That the House of Representatives works the same way, right? That the House of Representatives isn't based on who voted, how many votes the Republicans got versus how many votes the Democrats got in all the House races combined. It's district by district, which means that sometimes the Republicans get more votes, but the Democrats are in control, or the Democrats get more votes and the Republicans are in control. The Senate works the same way. State legislatures work the same way. We actually, this is an interesting part of this debate. It's so much more common than people realize, right? And I mentioned the Canadian election. The same thing has happened in Israel before, and probably, if you go back far enough, in any parliamentary system. It's because we care about, or the people who created these systems, they care about what happens in the long run, right? So obviously any one election is important to the people fighting it out in that election. But what matters more is, does that political system tend to cohesion, or does it accept entropy, right? Does it tend to pull people together, or does it allow things to go flying apart? And what some of the brightest minds, not just in this country, but around the world, have recognized is these two-step election processes where we use districts or states. They tend to cause people to coalesce, to build coalitions.
How can anybody look at the polarization that's going on in America right now and say that the Electoral College has helped bring us together as a nation?
No, that's a really good question. I think the irony is, on the one hand, we have a lot of noise, right? We have a lot of nastiness that has invaded our politics. On the other hand, when you look at particularly Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is the person a lot of people would hold up as the kind of the poster child for division. I mean, Donald Trump won by winning over Obama voters, right? That's how Donald Trump won. And so I think there's a powerful rebuttal in there to people who say, politics is just becoming more divisive and all this. I mean, people may not like Donald Trump. They may not like his tone and his, the things he says, or even his policies. But he won by reaching out and winning states that Republicans had not won in a generation or two. And, Hillary Clinton lost.
Even here in Colorado, Donald Trump won in the working class county of Pueblo, Colorado. First time a Republican has won there in over a half a century. All right, let's wrap it up with this.
Yeah.
People here in Colorado, you think, should vote no on the national popular vote, because why? What the most powerful argument against it is what?
I mean, Proposition 113 would give away Colorado's vote. That's the bottom line. They have raised about $2.5 million just from California, right? That's pretty revealing, right? California mathematically would have the most power over Colorado's vote if all of this happens. And California is flooding money into Colorado to try to basically buy those votes. I mean, it's almost transactional here. I mean, if Coloradans want Colorado to have a voice in presidential elections, they have to vote no on Proposition 113.
I think that put it as well as anyone could. Hey, Trent, thank you. People want to get information. Where do they go?
SaveOurStates.com is the website. Save Our States on Facebook is another place as well.
Trent, thanks. Take care.
Thank you, John. Thanks.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.